Thank you very much, Evan. Martin provided us with a very nice overview and analysis in the functioning of the science policy interface, more at the global level. What I would like to do now is to share with you some experiences we had working at the science policy interface, but at the national level. Before moving forward, let me just briefly introduce you who we are, CIAT. So CIAT is the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. It's part of the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research. In terms of research focus, we have three key areas. The first one is agrobiodiversity, then soils and landscape, and then decision and policy analysis, which focuses on climate change, linking farmers to market, ecosystem services. Within the CGIAR family, CIAT is leading globally the common program on climate change, agriculture and food security, CCAF, that some of you may know. So that's enough about CIAT. Now we talked a lot about climate smart agriculture. So I would like to start, before moving forward, to define a bit what we mean and what is the approach behind climate smart agriculture, and what is the sort of rationale to have developed this approach. The agriculture sector, as many of you know, is quite unique in the way that it has to simultaneously adapt to the impact of climate change, because it's one of the sectors most affected by climate change. But at the same time, if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement, the sector will have to contribute significantly to emission reduction. Then on top of that, to make it even more complex, the sector is facing emerging challenges like growing population, changing in diets, and also still a lot of the world pools depend on the agriculture sector. So the sort of solution to those challenges is quite complex. And this was the idea behind the concept of climate smart agriculture that has been pushed forward by different organizations, including FAO, CIAT. And the idea behind is really to try to identify options and practices that maximize the synergies between adaptation on one hand, but also mitigation and reduction of emissions when possible, and increase in productivity. So to really focus on this at this center and of adaptation, mitigation, and productivity. Now the challenge here is that this is quite complex, because to achieve such a transformation with multiple objectives requires first a lot of evidence-based support to understand what are the potential solutions, and also the involvement of many actors so that the transformation can take place on the ground. So as a response to that challenge, within CIAT Asia, we decided to rethink a bit the way we engage at the science policy interface by creating a new initiative which we call the Asia Climate Policy Hub. The idea behind the Climate Policy Hub relies on three core objectives. The first one is to link. So we intend, through that initiative, to strengthen our role as interface between CIAT scientific output on climate change and decision-making processes in private and public sectors by developing new kind of partnerships, and I will come back to that in a second. Second, as we are a research organization, we think, so we focus on economic and policy analysis, but with the objective to seek the integration of multidisciplinary methodologies to provide comprehensive analysis to complex problems. So bringing economic and policy analysis together with the expertise we have on biophysical work and so on and so forth. And finally, the third principle or approach is to and by this we mean to synchronize our research output with the needs of the partners we work with. And I will come back to this in a second, but just to give you an example here, we developed online user-friendly tool for cost-benefit analysis that is now being used by a variety of actors in the Philippines, for example, and in other countries. Now, I emphasized before about our focus on partnerships because, thanks. As we've said before, this whole transformation requires many actors to work together. And we wanted to rethink a bit the way we develop our partnerships, and we do that through two channels. The first one is to seek to develop more long-term partnerships with key public and private sector actors and as well as academia. So just to give you an example, and the list is not complete, but with in the Philippines we worked with the Department of Agriculture, helping them design and implement a program that is aimed at developing a long-term strategy for the upscaling of climate-smart agriculture in the whole country. With the international organizations like the World Bank and FAO, we are developing common methodologies like the Climate-Smart Agriculture Country Profile that I will discuss in a second, and we work jointly on that in many countries globally. We also work with the private sectors, for instance, with Mondelez in Indonesia, helping with the monitoring of their own supply chain and its impact on land use change. Another key approach for partnerships has been to work closely with regional bodies like APEC. So for instance, we have been supporting APEC in developing a multi-year action plan on food security and climate change. And now we're part of a committee that pilots the implementation of this action plan. So that's about those long-term, developing more long-term institutional partnerships. Now, on top of that, we have created a board of advisors, which we are now extending. And the idea behind the board of advisors is to have senior people who are from different backgrounds, private, public sectors, international organizations, and can help us anticipating better the needs in terms of research of our different partners, and strategizing how we can package research output so that it's as useful as possible to the end users. Okay, so now that's about the concept. Now let me just give you some specific examples on work we have been doing. One of our key tool that we have been working on to promote engagement on CSA is what we call the CSA Country Profile. The idea behind the CSA Country Profile is to assess the status of CSA in a country. It's a stock-taking exercise which is organized around three key pillars. First, understanding the context of the agriculture sector and its exposure to climate change. Second, we look at potential promising and existing CSA technologies that could respond to the specific challenges the sector is facing in a country. And finally, we analyze the policy and institutional landscape to try to understand to what extent it's an enabling environment to upscale CSA or not, and what are the key gaps. So that's the sort of content of the CSA Country Profile, but what is quite interesting about it is not only the content, but the process to collect this content. So it's based on existing literature and database, but much more importantly, it's based on a lot of stakeholder workshop and stakeholder engagement, where basically we try to collect existing knowledge in the country and try to create a momentum around CSA in that country. So it's much more of a starting point in itself to promote and further discussion on climate-smart agriculture, and I'll come back to that in a second. So we have been doing, also together with Evan, CSA Country Profiles in many countries. In purple are the ones that are completed, in green, in orange the ones that are currently in progress, and in green the ones that are under consideration. But one of the key takeaway here is that throughout this process we have been involving more than 1,500 experts and institutions. So really creating a sort of global, or supporting a global dialogue on CSA through the CSA Country Profile. Now, in addition to that, we have been working in Africa as well, and now in Asia, on subnational climate risk profiles, which are similar to the CSA country profile, but looking more at the regional level, involving also regional actors. And one of the key differences is that it looks at the entire supply chain. So for all the key actors in the supply chains, what are the risks they face related to climate change, and what are the potential solutions? And again, it's a similar process, which is very participatory and engaging different actors at national and local level. Now, the CSA Country Profile, as I said, is one of the tools of the Climate Policy Hub, but its end is basically starting the discussion, being a stock-taking exercise. But eventually, what we intend is that, or what we seek to do with the Climate Policy Hub is to create methodologies and tools that can support the different stages of decision making afterwards, from stock taking to prioritizing interventions. For instance, we have developed the CBA tool that I mentioned, supporting piloting, so helping the implementation of climate smart villages. Alice will discuss that in a second, but also informing policy design and implementation. And Martin mentioned the trade-offs across objectives, and now this is really something we're trying to look at together with CIAT and the World Bank in Bangladesh. We're trying to understand better what are the long-term implications of a certain set of policies in terms of reducing emission, but also in terms of food security and impact on poverty. Okay, so very quickly, my last slide. So now I just want to tease out some of the lessons learned working at the science policy interface in the context of research for development. So it's not a comprehensive review like Martin did, but some of my thoughts that can contribute then to the discussion later. So credibility of research is highly important, this is no question, but legitimacy and relevance is as important if we want to have an impact on decision-making processes, on policy making. The process matters almost as much as the output. And to that purpose, it's important to build long-term relationships and trust among the different actors, the scientists, the decision makers, the policy makers. Timing is key. So if there is already a sort of momentum in a country, for instance, to talk about CSA, and then you provide scientific support to that, it's usually much more effective. But the problem is, this is something scientists can hardly influence, whether it's a good timing or not in the country. So we can try to bring the discussions to raise awareness, but there are many other factors that play a role in terms of being the right timing or not for a certain topic. When we interact with decision making, it's important to define from the beginning how and by whom the output in terms of research will be used, and how it will be integrated in decision making processes and in policy making. And from that point of view, it's also key to think strategically how to maintain institutional memory, because too often we see similar research sort of work that is done independently without coordination by different institutions, or a bit later, a few years later, we redo the same that has been done before. And that the main issue is this lack of knowledge management and institutional memory that is often occurring and forgotten when we design projects in terms of research for development. So emphasizing on developing knowledge management strategies from the beginning and with the key actors is highly important. And finally, we have to deal with the complex processes, often involving multiple actors, overlapping policies, competing objectives, and information overload. So the policy process is messy, and that's just the reality. But Martin emphasized the importance of stock-taking work, like with the IPCC at the global level. But I think at the national level, it's also very important to address those and to be able to synthesize existing information and provide a stock-taking so that the decision makers have a starting point to move forward. Because often, one of the major challenges is that they are overwhelmed by the amount of information. So trying to synthesize information and stock take is key to have impact on decision making. Thank you very much.